I thought it was going to be a simple, quiet trip. Just a normal weekday escape to the beach with my dad. A few hours to breathe before life yanked us back into our separate routines. His steady and familiar, mine fast and unfinished. I didn't know that one ordinary moment, sitting beside him with the sound of waves folding into the air, would rearrange everything I believed about him, about myself, and about the thin, fragile thread that still ties parents and children together long after childhood has already slipped away. Greetings, dear listeners. Before I begin telling this complicated story of my life, I ask you to support our channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and write in the comments which city you are listening from. This is very important for us. And now, enjoy listening. I was 22 when my dad, Daniel, took me to the beach on a weekday morning. The kind of morning most people rush through without noticing. The sky looked undecided, pale, stretched thin, like it hadn't committed to a color yet. Everything felt muted. Even the world sounded quieter, as if it was holding its breath. I remember standing in the driveway with a travel mug of coffee I didn't even want, watching my dad struggle with the radio in his old car. The antenna was bent. One of the knobs was missing, replaced with a worn-out piece of plastic he'd somehow made work anyway. That car smelled like him. A little bit of sun-heated leather. A little bit of detergent. A little bit of time. And strangely, faint salt, even though we were still miles away from the ocean. "Ready?" he asked, glancing at me with that familiar half-smile. The one that always made me feel like he wanted to say something deeper, but didn't trust words enough to try. "Yeah," I said, sliding into the passenger seat. I shut the door and the sound echoed softly, sealing us into that small shared space. Two people related by blood and history, but living like roommates who only overlapped by coincidence. The drive itself was quiet. Not awkward exactly, just careful. The kind of quiet where you're both aware of it, but neither wants to be the first to break it, because breaking it might let something real spill out. The road stretched ahead, flanked by low trees and scattered billboards advertising seafood spots and souvenir shops. The farther we drove, the more the air changed. Got sharper, cleaner, like the world was being rinsed. I rolled the window down slightly, letting wind press into the car. That ocean smell came next, briny, clean, alive, mixed with something earthy like wet sand and old wood. I watched my dad from the corner of my eye. His hands were steady on the wheel, veins slightly raised, skin brown from years of working outside. He'd aged quietly, I realized. Not in dramatic ways. More like time had edited him with subtle strokes. A little more gray at the temples. A deeper line between his brows that hadn't been there when I was a kid. His posture still looked strong, but there was something underneath it now, like the strength had started costing more. He looked tired, but peaceful too. Like this drive was something he'd been saving for, even if he hadn't said it. We didn't talk much about why we were going. He'd called me the night before and said, "Let's go to the beach tomorrow. Just you and me. No explanation. No agenda." And I'd said yes without thinking too hard. Maybe because I missed him. Or maybe because some part of me sensed he wouldn't ask twice. When we arrived, the parking lot was nearly empty. A few cars sat far away, their owners already swallowed by the shoreline. The beach opened wide like a blank page, sand smooth except for footprints near the water. The waves rolled in gently, not dramatic, not loud, just steady, like breathing. We walked side by side toward the water, shoes in our hands. The sand was cool and slightly damp, pressing into the spaces between my toes. Somewhere overhead, gulls screamed like they were arguing with the sky. My dad stopped near a patch of dry sand and set his shoes down. He stared at the water for a long moment before sitting. I followed, pulling my knees up and wrapping my arms around them. The wind tugged lightly at my hair, like it was trying to pull my thoughts loose. "This place hasn't changed much," he said finally. He nodded. "Feels smaller than when I was a kid though." He chuckled softly. "Everything does eventually." We sat and watched the waves come and go. And I tried to remember the last time we'd done something like this. Just the two of us, without a holiday or a family event or a reason attached. Had been years. Life got busy. I moved out, he stayed where he was. Steady rooted like an old tree that never questioned the seasons. These were different. He talked about his own father. How distant he'd been, how hard it was to earn a kind word from him. He talked about mistakes he'd made early in adulthood. Choices he regretted, and the ones he didn't, even when they hurt. He listened. Really listened. And I realized something almost embarrassing. Growing up isn't only about becoming your own person. Sometimes, growing up is finally seeing your parents as people. Not just caretakers. Not just authority. But human beings with their own fears and regrets and unfinished parts. When we eventually turned back toward our original spot, I felt something shift in me. This wasn't about the beach. Not really. It was about connection. About acknowledging that everything changes, but that change doesn't have to erase what came before. When we sat down again, the tide creeping closer, I leaned my head against his shoulder. He didn't say anything. Just rested his arm lightly around me. Not too tight. Not too loose. Like he finally understood the balance. The waves kept rolling in, steady, patient. And I knew I'd carry this moment with me. One quiet moment I'd never forget. The afternoon stretched on in a way that felt almost intentional, like time itself had decided to slow down for us. After sitting quietly for a while, my dad stood again and motioned toward a small boardwalk curving off to the side of the beach. Weathered planks, faded signs, the kind of place locals used without thinking. I followed, brushing sand off my jeans, noticing how the sun had warmed the fabric where I'd been sitting. I used to come here alone sometimes, he said, walking slowly. When you were little. When things felt heavy. I looked at him, surprised. You never told me that. He shrugged. Didn't seem important back then. I didn't want to worry you. That sentence hung in the air. There were so many things parents carried quietly. Worries tucked behind routines, behind "I'm fine," behind long work hours and forced smiles. As a kid, I used to think adults had everything figured out. As a young woman, I was realizing how wrong that was. The boardwalk creaked beneath our feet. On one side, tall grasses swayed, tips catching sunlight. On the other, the ocean stretched endlessly, bright enough to hurt your eyes. We stopped near an old wooden bench overlooking the sea. The paint was chipped, and the surface was smooth from years of use. My dad sat down carefully, like his body needed a second to catch up with his intentions. I sat beside him, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. You ever feel like you're standing at the edge of something? I asked, surprising myself. Like you're supposed to step forward, but you're not sure what's on the other side. He smiled faintly. That feeling doesn't go away, he said. It just changes shape. The wind picked up, carrying waves and gull cries and distant muffled voices. Life continuing, unbothered by our quiet moment. I worry sometimes, I admitted, that I'm not doing enough, or that I'm doing the wrong things. Everyone else seems so certain. He turned and looked at me. Not glanced. Look, most people are better at pretending than you think, he said. Certainty is rare. Doubt means you care. Something in my chest loosened. We sat there longer, watching the water until he cleared his throat. There's something else, he said. Part of why I wanted today to be just us. My heart skipped. Not from fear. From the feeling you get when you know a truth is about to surface. I've been thinking about the past, he continued. About choices I made. Times I was too busy, too tired, too focused on providing instead of being present. I opened my mouth to reassure him, but he raised a hand gently. Let me finish, he said, calm but firm. I don't say this because I want forgiveness. His voice got quieter. I say it because I want honesty between us. I wasn't perfect. I know there were moments you needed me, and I wasn't there the way I should have been. My throat tightened. Memories rose up without permission. School events he missed because of work. Nights I waited up listening for his car in the driveway, angry and lonely, pretending I didn't care. But alongside those memories were others. Him teaching me how to ride a bike. Helping me with late-night homework. Sitting in the front row at my graduation clapping louder than anyone else, like he could make up for everything with sheer volume. "You did your best," I said quietly. "I know that now. Maybe I didn't understand it then, but I do now." He let out a slow breath, shoulders relaxing slightly. "That means more to me than you realize." Silence again. But this silence felt earned, like a pause after something important. Then he stood and offered his hand. "Come on," he said. "There's something I want to show you." We followed the boardwalk to a small path cutting through dunes. The sand shifted under our feet. Grasses brushed our legs. The path opened onto a quieter stretch of beach, secluded, where the noise of the world felt far away. He walked ahead confidently, like he'd done this before. We stopped near a cluster of rocks half buried in sand. The tide was low, and tide pools shimmered in sunlight. "I used to bring you here when you were little," he said. "You probably don't remember." I crouched and peered into a pool. Tiny creatures darted beneath the surface. A shell rested like a small secret at the bottom. "I remember bits," I said. "Mostly how excited I was to find things." He smiled. "You always wanted to know how everything worked." We spent time exploring, pointing out tiny fish, shells, sea creatures hiding like they were playing a game. And it felt grounding. Simple. The cool breeze, the salty air, the soft water against stone. At one point, I stood back and watched my dad kneel near a pool, expression focused and curious. And I realized something I'd never properly seen before. Parts of him never changed. Not the part that noticed details. Not the part that cared. He just buried it under responsibility for a long time. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky softer, we sat on the rocks watching light shift. The ocean reflected gold and blue, the horizon blurring slightly. "I don't know what the future holds," he said quietly. "For you or for me." He paused. "But I do know this. No matter where you go, you're not alone. You never have been." I leaned against him, resting my head on his shoulder. "I know," I said. And this time I really meant it. The walk back to the car was slower. The parking lot was still mostly empty, shadows stretching long across the pavement. We put our shoes back on, sand clinging stubbornly despite our efforts. On the drive home, the radio played softly, an old song that sounded like the past. When we pulled into my place, the sky was tinged pink and orange. I hesitated before opening the door. "Thanks for today," I said. "I'll remember it." He smiled, same half-smile as the morning but warmer. "So will I." I stepped out and watched him drive away, taillights fading into distance like the day was being folded up and put away. Inside my apartment, the quiet greeted me. But it didn't feel empty. It felt settled. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I wasn't tired, but because my tiredness wasn't physical. It was emotional. The kind that comes after you open a door inside yourself and realize you've been living in one small room when there's an entire house behind it. I lay in bed with the window cracked open, listening to distant traffic and replaying the day in fragments. My dad's voice. The sound of waves. The weight of his arm around my shoulders. Light but steady. In the days after, I noticed subtle changes in myself. I moved slower. Paid more attention. I noticed how morning light hit glass buildings. How the air smelled different depending on the hour. Like that beach trip had adjusted something in me, like focusing a camera lens. My dad called midweek just to check in. No big revelation. Just, "How's work? How's your knee?" We laughed about a neighbor he ran into at the store. Ordinary things. But even ordinary things felt different now, threaded with an understanding that hadn't existed before. "You busy this weekend?" he asked near the end of the call. "Not really," I said. "Why?" "I found some old boxes in the garage," he said. "Thought you might want to go through them with me." Pause. I knew what those boxes held. Old photos. Old school papers. Pieces of a past neither of us had touched in a long time. Yeah, I said. I'd like that. Saturday came. I drove to the house I grew up in, the one that still felt like a second skin in some ways. The lawn needed mowing. The porch steps creaked the same way they always had. My dad opened the door wearing an old flannel shirt and an expression somewhere between anticipation and hesitation. The garage smelled like dust and motor oil. Sunlight filtered through small windows, catching floating particles in the air. Boxes sat stacked against the far wall, cardboard softened with age. Didn't realize how much I kept, he said, scratching the back of his neck. Hard to throw things away, I guess. We sat on overturned crates and opened boxes one by one. Photo albums with cracked covers. Drawings I'd done as a kid. Notebooks filled with uneven handwriting. I laughed when I found a picture of myself missing 2 front teeth, grinning like I owned the world. You insisted on wearing that jacket everywhere, he said, pointing. Even in the summer. I thought it made me look important, I replied. He laughed softly, and for a moment the years folded in on themselves. As we went through things, he told me more stories. About how nervous he'd been dropping me off at school. About nights he'd sat in his car after work, gathering himself before coming inside because he wanted to be present, not distracted. There were tense moments too. A report card with a teacher's note about me not applying myself. A photo from a time when our family was going through something neither of us wanted to name. I didn't always know how to talk about hard things, he said quietly. Still don't sometimes. I'm learning too, I said. I think we're allowed to be bad at it, as long as we keep trying. He nodded, and I could tell that mattered to him. Later we took a break and sat at the kitchen table with tea. The house was quiet in that familiar way that comes from years of memory embedded in walls. I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. A chip in the counter near the sink. A faded calendar still hanging by the fridge, turned to a month already past. Can I ask you something? Said. Of course. Do you ever regret not doing something? I asked. Like taking a different path? He thought for a long time. I think regret is complicated, he said finally. There are things I wish I'd done differently. But if I changed too much, I wouldn't have you, or the life I built. He looked down at his cup. And that makes it hard to call anything a mistake. It wasn't a neat answer, but it was honest. And I was learning honesty doesn't always come with clean edges. That afternoon as I drove home, something clicked into place. That beach day wasn't a one-time thing. It opened a door. A different way of relating to my dad. Not as a child needing approval. Not as an adult proving independence. But as two people meeting somewhere in the middle. A week later I found myself back at the beach alone. Overcast sky. Darker water. More restless waves. I walked along the shore with my hands in my jacket pockets, thinking about how places hold memories. How the same location can feel completely different depending on who you are when you arrive. I sat where we had sat. Let the wind press against me. I thought about the future. Choices waiting like paths splitting in a forest. I didn't feel certain, but I felt supported, anchored. And that made all the difference. My phone buzzed. A message from my dad. A photo he'd found in one of the boxes. Us standing on the same beach years ago. Under it he wrote, "Still one of my favorite places." I smiled, warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the weather. Growth, I realized, isn't always about leaving things behind. Sometimes it's about carrying the right things with you. On purpose. With respect. With love that doesn't cling too tightly. As I stood and brushed sand from my coat, I felt ready for whatever came next. Not because I had all the answers, but because I knew I didn't have to face the questions alone. And that quiet moment with my dad, the one I thought was just another weekday trip, wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a foundation, something steady inside me, something that would hold even when everything else changed. Secret Woman Stories appreciates you all.